Good afternoon, everyone. The time is now 3 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And we're going to go ahead and get started with our program here today. My name is Christopher Miller. I am the Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. And on behalf of our staff, our board, our volunteers, I want to welcome you all here today to join us here in the Harriet Tubman Theater. I definitely want to thank the staff, Angele for her wonderful work, as well as our marketing team and everyone that has helped supported this event to take place. And so, without further ado, we're going to get to our conversation. But definitely, I want to make sure that there's an understanding that March is National Women's History Month. For those that are not aware, the National Women's History Alliance, which spearheaded the movement for March being declared National Women's History Month, has announced that this year's theme for 2023 is Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories. Celebrating women who tell our stories. And so we have an outstanding panel for today. And so we're going to look forward to that discussion. And so I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, but I want you to help us bring a warm welcome to this outstanding panel. We have first Michelle Starr. Dr. Robin Martin. Dr. ShaDawn Battle. Dr. Littisha Bates. And to moderate us through this discussion, to guide us, to pilot us through this outstanding conversation, we have Sister Keli.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I know that it is cold outside, but we have gathered here today at the wonderful National Underground Railroad Freedom Center to celebrate women who tell our stories. Put your hands together. I'm sitting here with some very accomplished women, and we are going to have some questions and some answers. We also want to have a little bit of audience participation. So, are you guys ready to come with me on this journey? Yes. Let's go. Let's get it, let's go. I'm going to start out, well, let me say this. I'm Sister Keli, Fox 19 community segment commentator and host of Prayer and Praise on Inspiration 1050 AM and 103.1 FM. You can find me anywhere in this city where there is a need, so don't be shocked where you see me. And I have a story too, and every other woman in here, I know you have a story. So we're going to be bringing up some things about the stories of these women here, and we're just going to talk about some things that truly can help women today. Amen?
Amen.
All right. So I want to start out by asking, and any one of you can answer. I would like to start out by asking, how has your family or faith helped shape your story? How has your family or faith helped to shape your story? Anyone can answer.
Well, I can start. My background is around women of color in. My background, I apologize, is around women of color and working in corporate America, and there being a large disconnect with the level of support. Working with two global leaders in the consumer goods and aerospace industry, I noticed there's a lack of representation and a lack of support for women. Going through my 25 years of experience, I had so many challenges that in the workplace that I really needed to rely on my family to help maintain my mental and physical health. And my family, which my husband and my son, which are in the audience today, were pinnacle support. They were my support system. They knew what I was going through, yet they cheered me on, they championed me, and they helped me forge ahead. So yeah, my husband and my son are definitely, my family was my support.
Okay. I'd like to also, I have some questions here for particular people. I actually have something for each one of you all. And so I want to ask Robin, you worked with the phenomenal Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and you helped to spearhead the $15 million donation to the HBCUs. Put your hands together. That's awesome. So many people could go to school and so many people could do things because of your work. How did that great work help to shape and mold your story?
So I think it helped to shape, I don't think it helped to shape my story. I actually think it helped to shape the Gates Foundation story. So I wanna back up, right? Because part of the reason why we do the work, the reason I do the work is to help the organization realize and actualize its own dream. And half the time it is steeped in not extracting resources from communities. So the grant came up because it was shortly after COVID. I worked on the post-secondary success team, which is really about funding higher education in this country. I knew two things to be true. Number one, COVID was ravaging the Black and brown communities at large. Black and brown people were disproportionately dying. Number two, because I worked specifically in higher education, I knew that HBCUs disproportionately were not going to have the resources in order to protect students, faculty, and staff from that disproportionate outcome. And so one of my white colleagues came to me and said, he wanted to run something by me. I call it run something by me. He wanted to run by what we should do around all these equity ideas. And I listened to a slew of equity ideas. And I just finally said, are you coming to me to ask me to co-sign what you already have? Or are you asking me, do you all want to do something meaningful? And he was shocked. And I was like, yeah, no. Everything you just said, it's fine, it's lovely, but it's not going to be meaningful. It's not going to be impactful. And so I pitched the idea of helping HBCUs build the infrastructure to support faculty and students around testing. And what was great about that, we selected 8 HBCUs that had medical infrastructure on their campuses that could do rapid testing, that could kind of galvanize around a response, a covert response. Those 8 institutions each took on 10 or more other HBCUs, and it became a spoken hub kind of model. And they built protocols, they built infrastructure around testing for students. Because at the end of the day, colleges and students have, particularly Black and brown students, there's been a decrease in enrollment over the couple of years. In order for us to minimize some of that decrease, we had to put together a mitigating process to help them go back to school safely. So the Gates Foundation got all the, they had all the hoopla. Everyone comes out and says, oh, great, this is great for the Gates Foundation. At the end of the day, HBCUs and Black leaders did more with that $15 million than we probably we gave out $7 billion, and they turned that $15 million into saving actualized people in community and faculty and staff, and revolutionized really the way we do the work, started to do the work or think about the work at the foundation.
Awesome work, awesome work. We tend to make a living by what we get, but we make a lifestyle by what we give. So you gave so much, and I want to ask a group question. Anyone can answer. or a couple of you can answer this. What are your thoughts on equity, inclusion, and diversity in media? What are your thoughts on equity, inclusion, and diversity in media?
We got a long way to go. So I think that it is fair to say that the representation has increased, right? I think that the shows that my children are able to watch are much more plentiful than the shows that I was able to watch, and are much more diverse in terms of the type of Black people that they see, right? And so growing up, I think we had a very specific type of Black folk that we saw on TV. They have a much wider range of diverse Black people that they see on TV. And still, they are inundated with white supremacist, Eurocentric views of what Black folks look like, right? And so while we have made strides in media, we still have a long way to go. And I think the other thing that I'll say, particularly about marketing and media and marketing, those folks still ain't learned their lessons, right? Because if they did, we would keep having blunders, right? We would keep having Black apes on shirts that they're trying to sell to Black folks. We would keep having Dove ads with the Black lady turning white, right? And so even when they profess, companies, to have a diversity, equity, inclusion lens, we know that the people that they have at the table are not the people that's gonna tell them like, now y'all know that ad ain't gonna play well, right? So we say we profess these values, but we don't necessarily put the people at the table or empower them once they're at the table to say like, that ain't a good look, don't do that.
Anyone else want to answer that? Take that one on? I want to say this. I believe that the seat at the table only recently became open. I mean, I see amazing things now in media, marketing, looking at commercials. You'll hear some Run DMC or something in the background of a toilet paper commercial, right? And so it's diversifying, but that seat at the table just got there, and we need more seats at the table, different perspectives at the table. All right.
I don't know if I'm on or not on. But we also need to, the World Wide Web is a beautiful thing. And so I was just writing a piece the other day, and it's almost like we need to stop asking permission or looking for permission to see ourselves. We exist all over the globe, and it's our responsibility to seek out those images for ourselves and for our communities. We created excellence. Excellence didn't show up by osmosis. We created it. And so we have the responsibility and the ability now to show our children, to re-educate ourselves and our children, and not wait for a seat at the table. We are the table. And I'm not waiting for corporations. There is not a media thing I don't go on, I just don't see a slew of white faces. I don't consume it anymore. I just don't consume it. If it does not represent me, I choose not, or limit the way in which I consume it. I think that we have to start to take an active stance around how we consume the things that we believe are important to us as a community.
Has the culture been watered down? Has the culture been watered down? Now,
Whose culture?
Our culture.
Black culture?
Yes.
It's what I would ask what does watered down mean? Because the truth of the matter is, I think when we ask whether or not it's been watered down, we're still centering centered in whiteness of itself. When you really think about what our culture is, and you have to go back to the original man to even understand what that culture is. So when we talk about what our culture is, we're doing it in the context of whiteness, in the construct of white America, as opposed to thinking about globally what is our culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So no, it's not watered, so it's only watered down to the degree into which we access it.
Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, so just to go piggyback off of what Dr. Bates was talking about, the media, and you're asking about not enough of us in those spaces. In order for many of us to get into those spaces, we do have to be invited and welcomed in, and we have to be included. And that inclusion is a powerful thing. Today's statistics shows that senior level positions that are held in America are typically held by white men. 62% are white men, with only 4% of women of color. That gap clearly shows that there is a big disconnect. There's an elephant in the room that's not being addressed. There's a gap. There's of missed opportunities that need to be capitalized on. And women of color, since this is Women's History Month, women of color, including Asian, Indian, Latin America, African, and white as well, but women of color are not represented enough in Americas, and the ones that are there aren't fully supported enough to thrive and succeed into those leadership positions that have the power, leverage, and authority to make those decisions, to ensure not only one, but more are at the table, and not only at the table, that they are adding value to where you don't have to have someone say, hold up, wait, that commercial is not going to fly. Hold up, wait, that TV show. It will be so many diverse perspectives and lenses there that it will become more of the norm than not. So it's those leadership positions that are missing.
I would say I think I care less about inclusion, right? Don't include me. I don't want to sit at your table if like the cultural narratives are still yours, right? Like don't have me sitting at your table and you expect me to eat macaroni as the main dish, for dinner. We not doing that, So I think what's more important for me is creating institutions that are run by us, so that we are the architects, we are the carpenters of the table, which means that we can control the cultural narratives, right? So inclusion is just a microcosm of really, what we need for an equitable society, right, in the context of media and representation. So like inclusion is not enough whatsoever. All right,
Definitely not enough. We need more.
It's about breaking down the systems, right? It's about systemic shifts and changes, right? And as long as the lens through which we're viewing everything is white supremacy, we're not going to have systemic changes and shifts, right? I know Tyler Perry is a hot button topic, right? Whether you like him or not, but one of the things you can't deny is that he's doing exactly that, right? Like, as you think about Tyler Perry Studios and others, right? There are others. He's not the only one, but his is sort of the largest, most recognizable name. And so what we see coming out of Tyler Perry Studios, whether you like it or not, he decides, right? He is the decision maker. And so it's things that resonate with him culturally and spiritually, and that's the key.
Yeah, and shout out to Ava DuVernay as well.
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
I think what she's doing with Array is incredible. Issa Rae as well. Thinking about like the shows in terms of media representation and Black people on TV. I loved Martin as a child. Right. And looking back, I did like The Cosby Show, but I realized how problematic The Cosby Show was because, it just absolves the state of its real responsibility for families who didn't have access and privilege like The Cosby Show did. Right. But now you got shows like A Queen Sugar, for instance, where they're telling the stories of Black people in agricultural communities who are still fighting against a very real and actionable type of white supremacy, right? If I think the the biggest asset that you can have to deem yourself American is property and land, right? I think that more attention needs to be paid to, the lives and the material realities of Black farmers. So I think that show was incredibly undervalued. Yeah, that's all I have.
So Dr. ShaDawn, you finally spoke to me. I got a question for you. I read something and it said Chicago footwork documentary.
Sure.
And it took me back because the Chicago house music and Chicago footwork, although we know Detroit got their footwork, right? Everybody got it, but it was such a big thing back in the day. And so I want you to kind of tell everybody, if you would, share with them your vision about this documentary and what you're hoping that it's going to do.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So for those of you who don't know, Chicago footwork is an art form and a culture that I grew up doing. It's endemic to, I want to say, the south side of Chicago, but in doing my research, it's really endemic to the west side of Chicago. It migrated to the south side, and the south side revolutionized it. Its cultural antecedents are house music, and then it transitioned into what we call ghetto house, right? And so it was produced and just germinated in the projects, right? So the sound was quite literally made from the brick walls of the projects, right? So that changed the claps and the sounds, and the music kind of sped up in every era of Chicago footwork until we arrived at 160 beats per minute, and which is really, really fast, right, to be moving. And so I was working on I had just finished my dissertation, and my mentor at the time was like, why haven't you published more of your dissertation? I'm like, I have PTSD from it. Like, I'm really tired of my dissertation. And she was like, well, do something that you are more passionate about. And I'm like, have you ever heard of Chicago footwork? And she's Haitian and Canadian. And, she was like, nah, show it to me. And then we both discovered, like, there's a dearth of scholarship on Chicago footwork. So the film actually started as a companion piece to the book project that I was working on, that I began with Chicago footwork. And I'm like, well, if I've got to go back home and interview folks, then I may as well, bring a film crew, and make sure that there's a bigger platform for Chicago footwork to be really understood, right? Because it's not an art form that was cultivated in Juilliard. It's an art form that was cultivated in back alleys and garages and, in basements and dim skating rinks. And so it doesn't have the visibility. In fact, when you think of Chicago, you think of crime, violence, et cetera, and everything you think of is true. But there's also another narrative, right? There's the narrative of what folks are doing to survive systemic forces that are there to historically dispossess them, right, of their land, of resources, of their identities, right? I call it a subjective negation that a lot of Black folks in Chicago experience. They're always fighting up against this narrative of humanity, right? And James Baldwin once said, it's crazy to ask to be recognized as human, right? To be asked to be recognized as human is to believe the theology that you're not human. But they're still fighting against these narratives regarding their subhumanity. And Chicago footwork has been a way to harness, one's humanity, and it's been a way to communicate through our legs when normative modes of communication have not been available to us. And so, in doing the film, what I'm hoping to accomplish is for the world, because it's now a global phenomenon, but I want the world to see that, there's a different narrative in Chicago, right? So here are kids who have, and a lot of young Black folks, right? So it's an art form that began in like 1984, 1985. So it's roughly the same age as me, like early 20s, right? And so, it's still a relatively young art form, but it becomes a means of allowing the world to see the youth in Chicago through a very different lens, right? It's still in a really aggressive art form. It's neutralized gang ties, but in many ways, it's allowed us to reclaim our voices. It's allowed us to regain a sense of purpose and belonging, cultural belonging, human belonging, et cetera. And so that's what I'm hoping to accomplish with the film.
So when you come in, I have to have the music people play. It's time for the percolator. Is that what you need? Or are you gonna bring Common with you? I'm getting these Common vibes. I'm getting all kind of Chicago vibes right now. But I mean, I think that's great because that art form, any type of art form, keeps you out of trouble, right? Keeps your mind from being idle. And unless you express yourself in a way that really you might be going through all this, but if I can just go over here and break loose and express myself, then I can live. And that's a part of womanhood, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Question to the women on the panel. And this is a little on the other side, but can you give an example where you had to experience pain in order to get to your progress? Something that happened that was painful to you, maybe you didn't understand it, but that pain helped mold and shape you to where you could get to your progress. Like, in other words, if you even look back at it now, if you hadn't had that painful experience, you wouldn't be where you are now.
You wanna? You go ahead, Michelle.
Thanks. Just talking about my pain, it kind of gives me that little, I just don't like that feeling. Again, my experience and journey in life has been around corporate America, working in corporate America. I've worked with global leaders where they have been supportive of women of color to thrive and succeed in their spaces. And coming out of lower income neighborhood, being raised by my dad, he developed me. I graduated from UC, joined Procter & Gamble. I thrived there, got married, had a kid, and did what a lot of moms do. They don't want to leave their kid. So that I traveled extensively with the company, and I'm like, okay, I no longer want to travel. I need to find local work. Finding local work, I experienced a lot of challenges working as a woman of color. I would come into a company and see a hanging noose. I would go express that to the manager, and they would say, okay, Michelle, you don't fit in. So they fired me. I would go to another company. The culture there wasn't supportive for women. I would express diversity issues to my manager. He would invite me to his home. I would then separate from that company. I work at another company, more issues of trying to get the vice president to adopt more equity and inclusion into his business plan, and I would get drug tested. I went through so many challenges, and I thought, okay, wait, let me go back to where I came from. I went back to those spaces like Procter and saw that they were supporting women of color. And I thought, wait, corporate America, there's something missing here. And am I the only one seeing this? In many of those companies, I was either the only one in those leadership positions as a woman, or I was the only person of color. So I thought, okay, I'll research this. I wrote a book about it. It was just published. I did a TEDx talk on it. And come to find out, America is broken. Their corporate employment system is broken. And so now I am advocating all employees to support women of color, especially the senior leaders in every industry. If senior leaders interweave inclusion throughout their entire organization, and if they become comfortable and lead with bravery and become unconsciously unbiased and advocate for allyship and link purpose. I hear this term purpose. If they link purpose to their environmental, social, and governance plans, they will then help fix this broken employment system. So now I'm advocating for that, and that's my pain to my purpose.
I love that. It's great.
So I don't know that I would sort of describe it as pain. Well, before we started, Chris made a joke about having all the Avengers in the room at once. And so I think I would more so describe it as sort of my origin story, right? And so much of how I show up today is informed by where I come from, right? Like Dr. Battle, I am from the South Side of Chicago, and I grew up in those projects that she talked about. And so I think coming from that place to end up in this place, so much of what I value in this place comes from the things that I valued in that place, the things that other folks didn't value, right? And so people will tell you about the crime and the violence in the projects on the South Side of Chicago, but they won't tell you about the community. They won't tell you about the life lessons that we learned there. And so much of what I know about how to survive, I learned in those places. And so I'm not sure that I really describe it as pain, but more so as my origin story. The way that I understand the world comes from those spaces. That's not to suggest that there was no pain in those spaces, right? I am the child of a teenager, right? Growing up in the Washington Park projects on the South Side of Chicago. There was pain, but I think the way that I choose to frame it at this big age is those were the lessons learned and the things that pushed me to get to where I am. And I want to say this because when I say that, then sometimes people will be like, why everybody didn't make it out, right? Like, it is not Horatio Alger. That's not a real thing, right? We like to tell this story that if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, well, what if I ain't got no boots? What if I ain't got no straps? I am not misinformed to believe that I was just able to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I had a number of folks throw me boots, throw me straps, show me how to tie them, that helped to get me to the place where I am. And so I think of it more so as my origin story, that is much more about triumph and joy, that has a little bit of pain sprinkled in it. But that pain has a purpose.
Yes.
So I call them courage stories. I call them courage stories. So if you look at the word courage, it has the word rage in it. And if I took all the stories that have just been shared here today, I'll give you an example. So I was raging against our government's response to COVID and allowing Black and brown people to die disproportionately, right? And not mandate that we do the things we needed to do. So I was raging against that and decided to do something. And that was to tell the richest man in the world to go do something about it. Okay, right? That wasn't his plan, but I was like, yeah, we're gonna do something, right? And so if you look at Dr. Starr's, she was raging against corporate systems that were discriminating against Black women. And so she started to do something about it. She wrote a book, and now she has a whole program about it. And we look this story in Chicago, right? That we keep telling the same narrative about Chicago that is fully enriched of culture and dance and happiness and joy. And so you're raging against, you didn't see that, and so you did something about it. And so I actually think that, I always say that courage is about humanity, and that rage is also about humanity. That I can be mad about what happened to me, I can be angry about what happens to me, but by the time I get to rage, it's because I see myself in community, and I see there's been an act against humanity. And then you cannot not act against it. Mm-hmm. And if you look at all of our stories and the things we shared here, even your work right now that you do, it's steeped in rage, but you have acted in very courageous ways to transform the thing that you wanted to see, right? And so I think it's important for us to start to change this narrative around pain and think about rage as love. And I think that's particularly important for Black women that have been positioned as angry Black women. And I'm like, yeah, I'm angry. I've been talked over, talked around for too long for anger to be even absent. But what I also am is I'm joyous, intuitive, brilliant, and all those other things. And so what I won't do is spend 80% of my time trying to worry about whether or not someone calls me angry and not develop those other wonderful, joyous characteristics about
Because they're going to call you
myself.
angry no matter what.
Because I'm going to be called, because it's a tool of the oppressor. And so I've been, part of what I've been trying to do is own it. Because it is the one thing that gives us the courage to go transform or see the thing that we actually do want to see.
So how do you give courage to the person that's sitting at home? Because I'm looking at 4 very successful women that have made it over, right? How do you give that courage to the person that's sitting at home? They're looking at a video. The video might be Cardi B, okay? They don't have any idea of how to first even call the college to get an application, and they don't have the support system. They don't even have a friend. How do we today, what words could we give? And I'm gonna start with you, Dr. Robin, to give courage to people, especially women who sometimes get stuck in what they're in.
Yep. So I built a framework around this. And so the first part of it is I stopped looking at Cardi B. I mean, no offense. Why am I looking at Cardi B? I need to look at myself. So the first part is be human. Like, right? And so part of us, we spend so much time looking outward that we don't look inward. And so I would say, be human. Like, understand you're good, you're bad, you're ugly. If I'm a 5 or 8-year-old, ask your kid, what's your good, your bad, and your ugly? We all got to explore, define, redefine who you are. You, as a full human, your whole humanity. The second part is, we're in community. All of us are in community. We're in some type of community. Be in that community. Align yourself with your community. Be able to say, how am I being in community? If I don't see the community I want, how do I go out and reach out to other communities and expand that community? The third part of it is be curious. What do I know? And I know. Every last person in here knows something. We got some basic line knowledge, and it is good. And then there's some things we don't know. And so we need to be curious about what we don't know and really start to develop a habit of learning. And then the last part I would say is be courageous. Each one of us has a sphere of influence. 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds have something that they can actually take action on. And so every day I ask myself, every meeting I ask myself, what can I take action on? What's in my sphere of influence that I can actually act upon? That could be around self-development, that could be in bettering my community, that could be about learning, whatever that is, whatever that action is. And so that becomes a mindset for you. But it starts with actually knowing yourself and stop looking at Cardi B. I want Cardi B to look at Cardi B, right? I want her to be her best.
They're at home and the videos are coming on.
Yeah.
But I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Can I give her a round of applause? Well, I was gonna give her a round of
Well,
applause.
no, let's do it, because I want to piggyback off of what Dr. Martin said. I think it's yes and. Everything she said. And I think what happens is this society has tricked us into thinking that we all got to be like each other, right?
That's right.
And so, like, I'm only successful if I look like Dr. Battle.
That's right.
Because she doing a film. Oh, man, I ain't did no film. I'm not a success. That's not what I was meant to do.
Yes.
Right? I wasn't meant to do a film. I can't wait to see her film when it come out.
That's right.
But I wasn't meant to do a film. And so I think what I would say to people, and I say this around like, what does it mean to be a resistor? What does it mean to be a protester? What does it mean to be successful? What my success looks like may not be the same thing as your success. Right. Comparison is the thief of joy and everything that happiness encompasses. So what I would say to people is, find your thing, right? Find where you want to be successful. What does success mean to you, right? Because we get so caught up in what these, let's call them what they are, white supremacist notions of what it means to be successful. And that draws us then to compare what we have or what we don't have to what somebody else has or don't have. If you just trying to make rent, success looks like I made rent.
That's right.
Period. Right. Full stop. And that's enough, right? And so I think I would encourage folks not to get bogged down in comparing themselves to others and measuring how they feel about them based on how somebody else feel about themselves. Mostly because we don't really know, for real. All we see is the social media. You know what I mean? Like, are they really happy? You don't know.
Right.
You don't know.
They're
why
paid to look happy.
I mean, and maybe they might be, but how did they get their happiness, right? What did they have to do to get that? You might not want to go through what they had to go through to get their happiness. And so that's theirs. And what's yours?
Well, Dr. Littisha, I appreciate what you said. And actually, the next question is for you.
I'm going to do my best.
Now, I have to know, I kind of warned you, I have to know about the class that you developed for the University of Cincinnati, Furious Psychology Studying Beyonce. And I want to know how that plays a part in your story and how it helps your students, young men and women that take your course.
So it's actually a Sister Keli, a sociology course. It's Fierce Sociology Studying Beyonce. And one of the things I have learned in this role is you got to Jedi mind trick people sometimes to get them to do the things that you want them to do. And so what we found is that we had classes on the books that was like Black feminist studies, theoretical studies of Black feminism. And those classes weren't feeling. And so I was like, okay, we want these folks to learn about Black feminist studies. How are we gonna get them to do that? Because they not coming, they not required to take a Black feminist studies class. That's another conversation for another day, because they should be, but they're not. And so I came up with this idea, and it wasn't necessarily solely my idea. A lot of this courses on celebrities was happening. This was pre the Lemonade syllabus, though. I do want to say that out loud, because my class was before the Lemonade syllabus. And so I was like, let's do it through music. Who is the biggest Black woman right now that folks will come just because her name is on the class? I got them folks in that class and made them read all kind of Black feminist scholars, only Black women, because I was centering the voices of Black women. And by the time that they left, they didn't even know, right, what had happened, right, what they had experienced when they signed up. But you definitely could see a difference between when they started. They had a cultural shift in their minds, because it wasn't just Black people, right? White people love Beyonce too. And so there were students who were, white students in particular, open to learning about Black feminist epistemologies, but didn't see themselves in a Black feminist course. But they saw themselves in a Fierce Beyonce course, right, studying Beyonce. And then they got in there and they learned about Ma Rainey and her foray into music. They learned about the difference between Black feminism and white feminism. They learned to think and interrogate critically the content that they were consuming and how it was harming Black women. We talked about a number of different ideologies and tropes. We unpacked this idea of Black girl magic and strong Black woman, and it just was really, for me, an opportunity to do something that I wanted to do, teach the students, centering the voices of Black women, and get them in the class to do it, right? And so I'm not opposed to a little Jedi mind tricking. And so they got in there and they did Beyonce. They listened to some Salt and Pepper. We was listening to jazz and blues and all kind of things. And they left more enlightened. And they grew, I think.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to go to Dr. ShaDawn and ask you another question. Would you please explain about critical race theory and what your stance is on it?
Yeah, sure. So we'd be here all day. But yeah, so critical race theory forces us to really take a step back and think about the construction of race and the ways in which race has been theorized in biological ways and through the lens of pseudoscience that has left us with this understanding that white supremacy is not a myth and it's a real thing, right? And so I wouldn't situate critical race theories, its origins, right, in the 80s or the 90s. Like I would go all the way back to the 18th, 19th century right? When folks were ranking the human races, right? So racial taxonomy is the ranking of the human races, and they were creating all these theories in order to justify violent practices, the pillaging, et cetera, of people of color, and for the enactment of power. So critical race theory at its like elemental level forces us to really think about the ways in which race has been constructed, as well as the tools we can use to deconstruct and then reconstruct race, right? And so in a space like this, I think that's like the most elemental understanding of critical race theory. I was just telling them about a course I'm developing. It's called Giving Whiteness a UTI, and it's really looking at like the critical perspectives of whiteness, because I'm a James Baldwin scholar as well, and one of the things that James Baldwin wants us to see is the ways in which America has been, the edification of America, U.S. white identity in particular, has been through, mediated through and by a lie. Right? So it's been mythologized in so many different ways. And we exist to fortify and to solidify white identity, right? And so if we begin to say, well, hey, actually, white supremacy is not a thing. Actually, your power has been made possible through violence, right? And through wielding the Bible as, and you know, the word of God as some kind of ordinance that justified the violence, right? What happens when we remove the lie? Well, whiteness and the identity of whiteness is going to be forced to relinquish its power, right? And so that's kind of what I want to do in this course. I want to understand, I want my students to understand, to theorize and interrogate whiteness for what it is not. And that can be really like problematic and troublesome for white folks, because then you mean to tell me I'm not the person that I am? Like this, the history of this country, the historical record of violence really usurps me and deposes me in the power that I will. And so like that can be really troubling, right? And it's not lost on me. I teach at Xavier, so it's not lost on me that my classes are predominantly white, which means I'm teaching the next generation of judges, of public servants, of law enforcement officers, right? All the people who can continue to maintain this racial hierarchy, right? And really material kinds of ways. And so what I want to do is use my classes for what I call epistemic, or not what I call, but what Jose Medina would call epistemic activism. Epistemology is the study of how we know what we know, right? And so if you want to be an activist in that particular field, that means you have to, what he calls, disrupt the slumber, the epistemic slumber, wake people up from their ignorance. I don't want to send folks out into the world, you know, Carter G. Woodson said, like, lynchers are made in the classroom. I don't want to send more lynchers out into the classroom. And so I think that we do need a discourse that forces us to continue to interrogate the lies upon which this country and dominant identities have been built.
And thank you for saying that, yes. And so my pushback earlier in the conversation about what does watered down culture look like, I'm like, we are the culture, like, right? Like if you decenter this in its way, then that would even be a question about whether or not our culture is watered down. That question only lives in a white-centered world in of itself. So it's not just white folks actually deconstructing. It would also radically shift the way we actually deconstruct the way in the way we see ourselves as well.
So I hear this term white supremacy, and there are, according to Forbes, 38% of white people feel uncomfortable talking about diversity. And to combat that, there are many white people out there that want to help. America, whether we like it or not, is browning. It's browning by the minute. And to help with that, there are many of them, and I'm just speaking on the other side. There are many that want to be more inclusive and equitable and diverse and having us belong, but they just don't know how. There's so many white people that there's a group that just blatantly know they don't want the browning. Then there's some who want it, but they just don't know how to do it. And then there's others that are kind of just onlookers. They're timid, they're uncomfortable. And I chuckle when I hear somebody refer to us as the Avengers, and I think about you saying the younger people who are looking on their TVs and wondering, how can they get better support. For women of color, we're talking Women's History Month, women of color who are looking for support, women need to first remain steadfast, because America just right now is not in your favor. Remain steadfast, but take care of you. Mentally and physically, we are drained trying to live in America. And then trust in yourself. Own your skills and talent. We are Avengers, but you who are looking out at us on those TVs, you are Avengers too. Like she said, there is no description of what success is. You are your own success. And so the allyship, I go back to this allyship. Senior leaders in every industry, and I'm talking government, she mentioned government. Government in America truly want to show that they are supporting women of color, they will place her in the highest seat possible to show that they are truly supportive of the woman of color. And I'm talking in the president's seat. So,
Can I say something to the white people in the room, to the white people watching later? If you, one, don't call yourself an ally, a person of color has to call you that. Because what we know is lots of white folks think that they are allies and they are perpetrating violence. So you don't get to call yourself that. You get to be called that by a person of color. Two, if you fancy yourself to want to become an ally, you cannot use the excuse of, I just don't know what to do. Because Dr. Google is your bestie. Not Wikipedia. He don't be getting it right. Find credible sources for your information. Because as Michelle pointed out, we are exhausted. And part of our fatigue and exhaustion comes from trying to gather well-meaning white folks who don't know what to do, but also have not necessarily taken the steps to do what needs to be done. And so I would urge you to think about that. If you identify as an ally, how did you do that? Just because you care? Caring is not enough. Caring is not enough. What are you going to do? What have you done? Have people of color who you care about say you have done something. And until then, think about why you identify as an ally. Is it because it makes you feel better? Or is it because you've actually earned that title?
That's good, that's good. Since we're on the subject, I absolutely believe in interracial feminist allyship. One of the reasons that I do like critical race, like feminist epistemology and critical race epistemology, is because a white woman who mentored me, right? We walk our dogs together, et cetera, and she's like just always challenging me and helping me to understand my positionality as a black woman in the world through my disciplinary focus, right? Of course, she can never walk in my shoes, and like sometimes it's to the point where like I'm like, damn, I forgot you was a white woman until you called me, like, hey, you want to run a 10K? No, I don't want to just run that long. Ain't nobody chasing me? Absolutely not. Like, no. Then I remember, like, no, she really a white woman, right? But I think when I think of like what she's like her role in my life, she's like, it's not just about allyship, it's about like using the power that she wields, using her place in the world and the privilege that she has as a white woman to put me in better spaces, right? To get me published, to get my name, circulated in different places. A good friend of mine held an Empower Her recognition ceremony that I was not able to make. I just was not doing well. Like the weight of the world had won this particular day. It was like maybe 2 weeks ago, and I just could not pull myself together. I had my dress on and everything, and I sent her a message, and I said, look, I'm not going to make it. I apologize. And my colleague did make it, and her entire speech, was about me. She used her platform again to speak about, the days that I would sit outside of her office to get help with my dissertation, and to think about, the ways in which I had really worked hard to cultivate my own understanding of genius and to use it for liberatory purposes. And I appreciate that about her. That for me is real co-conspiratorial allyship. And so I don't want to be a part of like white feminist communities in February whatsoever, but after February, I don't mind being in community with people who are actually going to do the work, who are actually going to put Black women and other Black folks in positions to eat and to thrive.
I like that.
This theme of allyship, how do you all feel about the allyship amongst Black women? Black woman to Black woman allyship.
It's a revolutionary act. It is. Who made this argument? I think in the book Eloquent Rage, I think it was Brittany Cooper talks about when she was in graduate school. I don't know if when she was in graduate school or when she was at Rutgers. I can't remember. But she would talk about how a group of Black women would congregate in the hallway of her academic institution, and people would think like they plotting a revolution. Like that, it's fearful, right? It screams insurrection. I could not exist without being in community with Black women, and part of it, and I was just sharing with Dr. Littisha that honestly, if I think about like how hard my journey in academia has been, in many respects, it's Black women who have pushed me out, right? So we talk about the push-out paradigm existing in grade schools, right? In terms of the disciplinary structures, infrastructures that are in place to create this pipeline that pushes Black girls into the criminal justice system. But there is also a push-out paradigm in higher ed. And when I think about like all of the difficulties that I've had, a lot of it has been at the hands of Black women. And that has been like, in terms of pain, I didn't get to talk about pain. Like that has been the most painful experience to me, but it still has not dimmed my light regarding being in community with Black women.
And I think that's more of where I was going. You said it's a revolution, and I thought to myself, will it be televised? Because a lot of the feedback I get from people is that they can work with this group, they can go with this group, they can hang with this group. But if it's them and another Black female, they can't get along. They can't see eye to eye. And I just, Dr. ShaDawn, I concur with you. I just don't believe that's always true. It's not always true. But does it happen? Yes. So I wanted to ask you all what you felt about it.
I think we have to be intentional, right? And so I think, we have this saying, all your skin folk ain't your kin folk, right? So there are Black women who, even in my institution, the ways in which I practice resistance, the ways in which I show up authentically, that don't jive with how they understand the ways in which they want to show up. I don't like it, but I respect it. I ain't never gonna talk bad about them in public. Because solidarity, the moment that they think they could turn us against each other, then they got us, right? And so I think that there is a very complicated relationship among Black women because internalized white supremacy, internalized norms of how you get ahead are real, right? And so I think that we have to be intentional about how we show up with each other and how we publicly show up on behalf of one another. There are some Black women who I don't flow with, but I'm never gonna talk bad about them or let nobody else, no other white folks in particular, talk bad about them in spaces.
But so when I was at UC, there was a Black woman, I was 25, 26 years old, and I was like so thrown because she was really whiter than George Washington. And I'm like, how can this be when Black womanhood is literally the antithesis of the implied subject of the Constitution? How can you be an agent of that particular power structure and that image? But what that did for me is like really strengthen my will and my motivation to really reach back and make sure that Black women under me don't have to undergo what I've had to undergo, and to make sure that I'm creating community amongst them.
So that's great. Now, how do we, or do any of you have any thoughts about a solution of healing for that? Because when something is healed, then it can grow. But as long as something stays wounded, sick, broken down, guess what? It's hard to grow. It's hard to become. Does anybody have any solution?
There's some basic steps that we can take as women of color to support one another. And this applies to white people as well, but just the basic things that we can do. Every day when we wake up and we exit our homes and we go out into the world, think, how many women of color did you see or do you see? When you see them, did you acknowledge them? When I say acknowledge, did you smile? Did you wave? Did you speak? And after that, if you had some interaction, did you build on their comments? Did you echo their comments? Just being, we are, I chuckle when they say they're Avengers, but we and anyone else can support women of color by mentoring, sponsoring, elevating. So those are just the basic things. I mean, a head nod, a speak, a wave. We don't get it. We don't get someone, like she just said, if there's a person that she doesn't flow with, she doesn't disrespect, and she would not allow another person to disrespect. That is allyship. And America is not designed and built to support us, because when you only have one or a few in the room, it causes competition, and that competition does not advocate for support.
I would be remiss though. I would be remiss if I don't say this. I have a totally different experience with Black women. All that I am, all that I will ever become, is because of Black women. My community of Black women, friends, professional, is the greatest sisterhood that I have ever had. I honor them every single day. I feel heard, seen, challenged, loved in community by Black women every single day. I show up in ways for them, and in return, they show up for me. And so, while I think we all have different stories and narratives, but I have to say that there are communities, everything that I am. I would not be who I am without the magical and the humanity of Black women. And so yeah.
Absolutely. No, 100%. Yeah. Absolutely. Shout out to my sorors who drove downtown to be here with me today. That's community. That's sisterhood.
Mm-hmm. What's the time? Because I just feel so comfortable.
She's saying.
Okay. Well, let me go to the audience.
Oh, okay.
Does anybody in the audience have a question for one of our panelists? Anybody? You can just stand up, raise your hand. Oh, somebody up top.
So I came in at the very end, but I just have a question for you, because I work as a manager of an assisted living in Wisconsin, and almost all the people I work with, all the young CNAs and some of the nurses, everyone, a lot of my CNAs are not educated. How can I encourage them to get further education? We have a new company, and we've been trying to do that, encourage them to, you don't have to stay as a CNA or an aide at a nursing home if that's not what you want. There can be other roles out there. Well, do you have any suggestions? I mean, I love to think about, whenever I encounter everybody, I say hi, I talk to them, I get their stories, they get my stories. It's a really wonderful place. but how else can I encourage people?
So I'm assuming your CNAs are women of color?
Yes.
Okay, so, one, their home lifestyle may be slightly unsupported than the non-women of color lifestyle. So I would strongly suggest that you allow flexibility. When you do encourage them to further their education, they may want to and have that desire to further their education, but they don't have the support network in place to make it happen. So if allow flexibility on their time, work hours, flexibility on their education throughout, their work week. Talk with them, ask them what would they like for you to help them with or assist them with to make that happen. It's those conversations that are not written in policies or written in the manual book procedures that can be flexed. And I'm sure you would probably get a lot more support from them just by asking.
I think I would also add don't assume what they want, right? So my mother is an LPN. She started out as a CNA, and she started with a group of women. And some of those women actually enjoy being CNAs and are 30-year CNAs. It is hard work. I don't know how they enjoy it because I don't know that I could ever do it or do it for as long as they have done it. But I think just being mindful of, so I do community-based participatory research. And one of the primary premises of that methodology is not assuming that I know what is best for the community or what the community wants. And so I think financially, it makes a lot of sense not to stay a CNA, right? To move up the ranks. But maybe they have reasons why they might want to. I think I'm just saying that to say, to not just walk in assuming that they could be more than a CNA. Because even the ways in which we use language can be terribly problematic. Because if I am happy and fulfilled being a CNA, you may not understand it because I don't make no money. You may want to help me by becoming more, but maybe I'm good here. And maybe this is what I want my path to be, right? So I just say that to say, ask them what they want, because it may be that they're fine where they are, right? And for those that are not, then create flexibility where they can do courses during the work hours every so often, or so whatever the case is, right? We can't say we want to liberate people and not create systems to allow them to become liberated. And so if they want to be CNAs, support them in that. If they don't, support them in that too. Sister Keli, look back first.
I have a hearing problem, so I haven't heard a lot of what you said. But I'm from Lansing, Michigan, and our church is joining with a number of churches in town to look at reparations. And the reparations decisions would all be made by people of color. And the churches would join in pledging certain amounts of money toward the Justice League, that's the name of the organization, and the Justice League would decide where to put those monies. And like I said, everyone that would make that decision would be persons of color. It would have nothing to do with, having a collaboration with various people.
Reparations are difficult because you're going to give me stolen 40 acres, right? I don't even know where to begin with that. Reparations are difficult, right? Because even as we think about giving Black folks 40 acres and a mule, you giving me 40 acres of land that you stole from somebody else, right? And so I think that it's a very complicated conversation. I applaud you all for engaging in this work, because we have to start somewhere. But our Indigenous brothers and sisters have to be at the forefront of these conversations. And so I think even when we use the term people of color, I am not a person of color, I'm a Black woman. And
Same.
so I think that as we have these conversations, we have to be very clear and intentional about who we are including. And I think that all folks who have been minoritized in this country should be at these tables as we're having these conversations. And we have to be clear about who we're centering depending on what we're talking about. And if we're talking about reclaiming land, our Indigenous brothers and sisters have to be the leaders and centered in those conversations.
These questions are great, and it's just so sad because we got to go. But the thing of it is, with the questions, you give us reason to come back.
Yes.
This has been awesome. We're going to now turn this over to Mr. Chris Miller.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Keli. Can you hear me? Thank you, Sister Keli.
You borrow.
Thank you, Sister Keli, for moderating this outstanding discussion. First of all, I want to clear about the Avenger. I feel the need to do that. Those that know me personally, I'm a big science fiction fan. I think there are a lot of lessons, social lessons we can learn from the work that is done when it comes to science fiction. And one of my favorite characters is absolutely Black Panther. I know quite a bit. The one thing, if you really look at that storyline, is the leadership and the power of women. When we talk about that part of the Marvel universe, the role of women, their strong presence. And so when I call my colleagues and friends over here Avengers, it's because I look at them as sheroes. Whether I've known them for a few months or a few years, all of you are sheroes in my eyes. And so when I see you, that is my way of giving my respect to all of you. And that begins with my mother. So this is Women's History Month, and we are telling their stories, and I just wanted to be sure that our institution plays a role in setting forth a platform for Black women, as well as all women. But because of the history, because of sometimes this opportunity is not afforded to Black women, we wanted to give, make sure this platform for you to tell your stories. And so I appreciate everyone who has contributed to this program. I want to thank my staff and all the brilliant women that's also down here with the mic that have been a part of making sure this comes together. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for spending your time here with us. This is something that is great. It's been filmed, so it will be uploaded to our video library. So please stay connected with us through our website at freedomcenter.org. You can always go to our video library. You will see many of the programs, including this one that we have videotaped. But once again, I want to thank all of you for attending, and I want to thank this outstanding, remarkable Avengers panel that we have here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.